Hi everyone, I'm Kim Kieber, FCSS Outcome Measures Trainer, and this video is to introduce you to the Excel data collection tool that we have created for the Volunteer Income Tax Program. If you haven't watched any of the other videos yet and you are new to using the tools, I highly encourage you to go back and watch them, especially the one about the registration page, as there is a section of that will be required to understand this video and the process we are using. So I'm just going to quickly show you the section of the registration page that I'm referring to. So this gray section at the bottom is where you are documenting the information that we are actually tracking. And if you haven't watched it yet or looked at it yet, there is a video on where to actually find all of this information. So just be aware, this is where the information is coming from when we look at the Excel document. So with the Excel document, it is critical that you do not change the document. There are a couple of exceptions, and I will go through those shortly. But basically, because this spreadsheet is being used by many communities around the province, and this is what we are using to aggregate the data provincially, unfortunately, if you make changes to the Excel document, other than the exceptions I will walk you through, your data will not be able to be included in the provincial aggregation. So we are really hoping that you won't change it and that you actually use it as instructed in this video. So now I will show you the Excel document. So for those of you who have been using it, for the most part, it hasn't changed too much. One of the first things that you will see is you can see in light blue here, this is to try to highlight the month, that this is the month of January. And then in purple, let's try to just capture the month of February, and that goes all the way down. Some of you do taxes every month of the year, so you can track your data by the month. Some of you only do taxes in March and April, so you can leave January blank, February blank, and just do March and April. I will tell you, though, that when we aggregate the information provincially, we are not looking at monthly totals. So if you decide that you don't want to track all the data by month and you just want to enter it all under 1 month to make it simpler on your end, then that is absolutely fine. Just know that that is an option for you. I will let you know that we have formulas that have been entered into this document. And part of the reason why you have to use it the way it's instructed is to ensure that those formulas stay in place, that they don't get erased or that they don't get changed. So we have totals, you can see here, for every row. For every tax return filed, we have totals there. So there are formulas there. We then have totals for every column at the end of every month. Now I'll just quickly scroll to the very bottom that show you we have formulas to show your total for the entire year. So again, it's just critical that you follow the instructions so that those those formulas don't get erased. Okay, we'll scroll back up to the top. So when we look at the first column here, it says tax year. So again, as you know, if you've done the Volunteer Income Tax Program, someone will come in with 3, 4, 5 years worth of taxes. So this is just to document what year the tax return that you filed was for. And there is one exception, but I will get to that shortly. The next 3 columns, where you can see A, B, and C, this is about a community of residents or which community someone lives in. So some of you only do taxes for folks who live in one community. So you would only use one column. Some of you do it for multiple communities, and you may want to be able to identify how many tax returns were filed per community. So let's say you could do, okay, I want to do it for Okotoks, I want to do it for High River, and I want to do it for Turner Valley. So you could just do that and then document underneath how many, which community someone is from. And how you do that is you put a number 1. So you put a number 1 under the community that someone lives in. Now, we only use a number 1. We don't put an X. We don't use any other kind of symbol. We must put a 1. And the reason for that is that when we scroll down to the formulas, you can see it automatically totals the number of returns for each community. And if you put an X, it will not count in the total. So you have to use the number 1. Again, there is one exception to that, but I will get to that shortly. For those of you who need to track data for more than 3 communities, this is one of the only places you can actually change this document. So you can insert some columns here in order to have the number of track the number of communities that you like. So all you do is you highlight and then you insert, and then more columns show up. And I'm just going to undo that. Now, if you only have one community and you can just leave the other columns blank, or you can also highlight them, right click, and you can delete them if that's what you chose to do. That's totally up to you. So again, you just put a 1 under whatever community they are from. And we should only see 1, 1. Again, there is an exception, and I will get to that shortly. The next 4 columns, so this section right here, this is where people get hung up a little bit. So this is where these 4 columns will actually, in the end, provide us with the total number of tax returns filed. And we're doing it in kind of descending order. So if someone is a senior, you put a 1. And that's it. If they happen to be AISH, or they happen to be low income, or they happen to be a resident, you still leave those blank. If they're a senior, you put a 1. If they're not a senior, but they are on AISH, you put a 1 under AISH. And even if they are low income or a resident, you do not mark that off. It's just you put number 1 as we go along. So if they're not a senior, they're not on AISH, but they are low income, you would put a 1 there. And again, if they're not a senior, they're not on AISH, they're not low income, or just a community resident, then you would put a 1 here. So the only way that this would be different is in the situation where 2 people have co-filed. So we've had some challenges over the last couple of years with co-file and how to deal with that. So what we're going to do, if it is a co-file situation in the tax year, you're going to put co-file 2022. Now, under the community of residents section, the total number here should be 2. So let's say it's 2 people from High River. And then in this section, under the senior AISH low income residents, it also should show 2. So it's possible that they're both seniors. Let's say we had another co-file and it was for 2022, and they're from Okotoks, and there was 1 senior and 1 community resident. So, there we go. So it's critical that the numbers here are total the same numbers over here. And when we enter a number 2, we need to be sure that we're not doing this. I'm not doing 2 ones, because that actually shows a total of 11 at the bottom. So we only put a 1 if they're a senior. And if they happen to be AISH low income, that's fine. We leave those blank. If they're not a senior and they are on AISH, we put a 1 under AISH, leave everything else blank, and so on. And there is another really short video to show you how to use this section again, specifically because people do have a few challenges with it. If we go to the next column, this is where we're tracking the number of children, and we get this information off of that gray section. All of this information should be off the gray section at the bottom of the registration form. Some of you aren't tracking number of children, but we really, really are encouraging you to, because it is incredibly valuable information to know how many children are impacted by this program. The next column, we have GIS, or Guaranteed Income Supplement. And I'm just making numbers up. I don't know that this would make sense for GIS, but let's say it was $678. So, and then we come to social assistance payments. So this column was called the Alberta Seniors Benefit previously, but we changed the title of this column to be more accurate and reflect the wording in the actual T5007 tax slip, as well as the tax summary page, because that's what it's called. And it actually tracks more than just the Alberta Seniors Benefit. It also captures any social assistance payments, AISH payments, and any kind of housing subsidy someone might have received. And so let's say it's $567. So you can see, if we go over to the right, that the amount that we're entering is being totaled. So as we enter the information, it's automatically being totaled because there are formulas there. So that is part of the reason why we need to be very careful not to change this, because it can mess up the formulas. Then we have GST, we have the Canadian Child Benefit. We now are once again collecting the Climate Action Incentive. Let's say, I don't know, 400, making stuff up. I don't know if those numbers make sense. The Climate Action Incentive used to show up under the tax refund, so we weren't tracking it directly. Canada Revenue Agency has made some changes this year, and it's no longer showing up under here, under the tax refund section. So we are tracking that specifically. When we look at the tax refund and tax owing, you will notice this looks a little different than last year. So we used to have them in one column, and if it was a tax refund, it would be a plus number, and if it was tax owing, it would be a negative number. So after some discussion, it has been decided to separate them. And the reason for that is that if someone owes taxes, it was being deducted from the total benefit amount that they were receiving on this form. And we felt that that wasn't really accurate or reflective of the amount of benefits coming back into the community. So what we've done is we've separated them. And so you would enter it in whatever column makes sense. So we're still tracking tax owing, but this column, the tax owing column, is no longer included in the total for that row. So we still have the information, but it's not being part of the total. Now, in the past, when we did tax owing, we did a negative number because it was being subtracted. So you can still enter it as a negative number if you want, or you can enter it as a positive number because it does not change the total. So it's totally up to you as to whether you do it as a negative or a positive. It will not impact the total and how things are aggregated. As you can see, for the month of January, we have 20 rows available. Now, most of you, 20 rows for the month of January would be a lot. But once we especially get to March and April, for example, the month of March, I think we've got 46 rows available. Some of you are going to need hundreds. So we are going to need to insert rows, and there is a very specific way to do that. So if you can see here, highlighted in yellow, there is a row that says insert additional rows above this row. So for every single month, January, February, March, and on, you will see a row highlighted in yellow that says insert additional rows above this row. So how we insert rows is you click above the yellow and you highlight that row. Then you right click and you just go copy. And then you put your cursor over that row again and you right click again. And then you say insert copied cells. So now a new row has been inserted. And as you can see from the 0 there, the formula is still present. The one thing that this messes up is on the right-hand side, we have the number processed this month. So now there's 2 number 46s. So if you're tracking using this column for how many people or how many tax returns were filed, you will have to, and you're inserting rows, you'll have to go through and change these numbers. I couldn't figure out how to get Excel just to do that. The other option, though, is if you're looking at how many files were returned, if you look at that for that month, if you total senior age low income resident, that will give you also how many files were how many returns were filed for that month. Now, when it comes to needing to insert a whole bunch of rows, we don't have to do them individually. So all you would do is you would highlight a whole bunch of rows. Again, you would right click, you would copy. Put your cursor over on the rows again, right click, insert copied cells. And that's all we need to do. So a mistake that some people are making is they're right clicking and they're going insert. But when we do that, you will notice the formula does not show up. So do not do that. We highlight the row, right click, copy, right click, insert copied cells. So that is how we insert rows. Again, it's critical that the only things that you change are potentially the columns having to do with community of residents and inserting rows. Those are the only things that can be changed on this document without messing things up. So you enter all your data for the month and it'll give you monthly totals for all the different columns. And once you're done at the end of the year, dun, 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 the very bottom, it totals everything for the entire year. So it can become cumbersome and time consuming if the formulas get a bit messed up, because that's a lot of data to be aggregated. So keeping it clean and following the instructions helps us get accurate information and do it in a way that doesn't take tons and tons of time. One of the things that I wanted to mention as well, some of you are, I'm just going to scroll to the top, you know, you'll say 2022, this community, there's senior, and then there's zero information or $0 numbers added under these columns. So typically when that happens, it's because you did file their return, but for whatever reason, that shaded gray section at the bottom was not filled out. So there was actually no data tracked for that. So what we're asking is that if that is the situation, to not even bother entering this data. Because what that does is at the end, when we aggregate everything, it actually skews the data. So if you do not have the dollar amounts to enter, it's okay to not enter it at all. I just want to scroll over and show you a couple other things. One is our volunteer information. So I will clarify, tracking the volunteer information on here is up to you. We are not aggregating volunteer data from this document because you must report all number of volunteers and number of volunteer hours for all of your FCSS programs on your FCSS annual reports. But this can just help you if you're curious and want to know volunteers and volunteer hours specific to this program. One of the things that I'll point out at the bottom, sorry, I have to scroll to the bottom again, is that it will automatically populate the total number of volunteer hours based on everything you've added up above. But the total number of volunteers is highlighted in yellow, and you see a question mark there. And that is because, you know, you might have 2 volunteers in February and 6 volunteers in March. Does that mean you had 8 volunteers? Chances are not, because the 2 from February also volunteered in March. So that would still only be a total of 6 volunteers. So the only way to use this document to track it is for you to manually document how many number of volunteers you actually had. I'll also show you, sorry, scrolling up again. On the right, we have a legend that basically goes through what all of the abbreviations are in the Excel document. And honestly, all of those abbreviations, you will also find the information in I believe it's video number 4 or handout number 4 about where to find the information. So that is how we use this. There is also, sorry, I just have to move the page up. There is also a second sheet in the workbook that is an example. So it shows you what a completed one could look like. So this is what it can look like. And as you can see, for co-file situation, we have 2 people from community B, and one is a senior, one is low income. And so you just enter the information. You don't have to delete rows if you didn't use them. You can just leave it as it is. Enter all the information that you can. And then at the very bottom, at the end of the year, this is what can show up. And again, you know, I have heard many stories from your individual communities about how your FCSS boards and your councils are absolutely loving this information to show the impact it's having, again, on poverty reduction and economic self-sufficiency. And especially with this program, because for most of you, you've got volunteers doing the majority of the work. So it's very little FCSS financial investment to achieve these kinds of results and this amount of money coming back into our communities, which is fantastic. I'm just going to stop share real quick. So when you complete the tax return and you fill out the gray section at the bottom of the registration form, what a lot of folks are doing is they tear off that gray section and they're just putting it in a file folder. And then once they get a whole bunch, then they go to the Excel document and then they're just doing the data entry. Some people have actually given the Excel document directly to their volunteers and they're just adding that information directly in there. It's really up to you on how you approach that and based on what works. So again, just really encourage you to use the document as instructed. Do not make any changes except for the 2 places, which is adding or deleting columns around the community of residents and inserting rows in the specific way that is instructed. And that will ensure that the hard work that you're doing to gather all this information and then provide it to us can actually, be rolled up with all the other communities around the province. So I just want to say thank you for doing this work. The province is loving it, and it's showing a huge impact. And so again, if you have any questions, I just encourage you to rewatch the video. But if you have remaining questions after that, as always, please reach out to your FCSS Outcome Measures trainer. Thanks all.